the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, where we discuss all things crypto related. Your host, Kieran Ryan.
What would a national budget measured in Bitcoin look like? Nearly a month after Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivered his 2024 budget, we've had more time to reflect on what it means for the future of the country. The response from economists was generally lukewarm, given the frightful predicament the minister was faced with. These annual budgets famously overestimate economic growth and just as famously underestimate spending. Personal income taxes are expected to raise 40% of total tax revenue, and tax creep will help the Treasury get there. Tax creep, that's when income brackets are not adjusted for inflation, so annual pay increases bump you into higher tax brackets. It's a neat trick that governments pull all over the world when they want to squeeze taxpayers without making it seem like they're raising taxes. Overall, taxes are likely to swallow nearly 25.3% of GDP in the current fiscal year, and that percentage also has a nasty habit of creeping upwards as government consumes more and more national wealth creation. Most concerning, perhaps, is the abysmally low expectations for economic growth, projected to reach 1.3% this year, according to National Treasury, and the year after, just 1.6%. So I ask the question again, what would a budget measured in Bitcoin or gold look like? To answer that, we're joined by Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, to help make some sense of this. Hi, Dawie. It's good to talk to you once again. Maybe set the scene for us with your key takeaways from the latest budget and where this is leading us as a country.
Yes, thank you for the invite. All right, a couple of things on the budget. You mentioned 25.3% is tax to GDP. Actually, the number is much, much higher than that. It's in excess of 30%, because you shouldn't look at the tax burden on the economy or tax relative to GDP. You should look at expenditure relative to GDP, because the rest of the money is simply borrowed, and that is taxes, but it's postponed taxes. So the actual tax burden today on the economy is well in excess of 30%. And if you include other things, like, for example, state-owned enterprise and the local authorities and so on, then the real tax that we are paying in South Africa is much, much higher than that. It's probably in the region of about 40% or even more than that relative to the size of the economy. So the fiscal accounts are in very deep trouble. The debt levels keep on going up. The fiscal deficit is very, very much bigger than economic growth, and that means that the debt levels will keep on going up. And very concerning is that the second most important expenditure item to the Minister of Finance now, after education, is interest on state debt. And if interest keeps on going up, then of course there's less money to spend on other things in the economy. So that is exactly what is happening. We are in really deep trouble in South Africa, and if this continues, we are heading for a financial crisis in South Africa. So that, I'm afraid, is the reality. Now, you mentioned what will happen if we measure the budget in Bitcoin or in gold, and I was thinking about that, and that is actually a very, very interesting question. I think there are two issues here. The one is, and we have to talk about that, and what is the role of the state? And what does an ideal tax regime, what does it look like? And what is the state supposed to be spending money on? Now, on all of these questions, there are answers to that. There's a theoretical base to this. So I can give you answers to what an ideal tax system can and should look like. And certainly ours is not that. I can just maybe make the comment is that a poll tax, a head tax, what Margaret Thatcher tried to implement is, and I'm not suggesting we should have that, but I'm just saying that is the purest of all taxes, just by the way. So on the revenue side, on taxes, there are certain taxes that are much worse than other taxes, without a doubt. And on the expenditure side, there are certain functions of the state, so-called primary functions of the state, like, for example, defense and policing and so on, and things like, for example, South African Airways or a state-owned enterprise that is certainly not part of the primary function of the state. So there's a lot of theory around that as well. And I think that is important, because you asked the question on what will the budget look like if it's measured in Bitcoin. And remember, Bitcoin, or these so-called cryptocurrencies, they have certain characteristics. And one is the characteristic usually of anonymity. It's very difficult to steal somebody's crypto money if you do not have access to that crypto money in the form of having access to a specific key. It is much easier if you're the receiver of revenue to steal somebody's money out of his bank account, because you simply call the bank and say, listen, I've got a court order, I'm going to steal the money out of the bank account. But they can't do that if you have Bitcoin. So the reason why I mentioned these two things is that if we tomorrow morning decide that we're only going to use Bitcoin as money in South Africa, and that of course is a big if, but if we use Bitcoin tomorrow morning, then the nature of the revenue of the tax regime will look completely different, and state spending will look completely different as well. And the theoretical form that the state is supposed to, or the role that the state is supposed to be playing, and what tax regime should look like, will actually be forced upon politicians. So it will not be possible, for example, to have so-called progressive income taxes, as an example, because they won't know what my income is, because they will simply hide it, as an example. So the only way that they can get money from me is if they implement some sort of poll tax. We all pay 1 Bitcoin per month, or whatever the case might be, and or if they charge me a user charge for something, like a toll road, as an example. So the question of what will happen if we measure the budget in Bitcoin, as an example, is a huge, big question, because it can lead to dramatic changes in everything that we do in a country.
Now, it sounds like it would lead to the complete collapse of the progressive tax system. I mean, you're talking about a poll tax, which I think you explained, if I understood it correctly, that's a tax per head. Now, the question that arises from that is, what if a person doesn't have an income to pay any tax at all? What do you do? That then introduces the progressive scale again, doesn't it?
No, there's an answer to that one. Remember, the budget consists of the revenue side, taxes, and the expense side, where they spend the money on. So, for example, if we introduce a poll tax, and that means everybody must pay X amount, exactly the same amount every month to the state, or every whatever period to the state, then the state can, on the expenditure side, the state can spend money as the politicians see fit, including giving people money to pay their own taxes. If you understand what I'm saying. So it's not a matter of, I don't have a work, so therefore I can't pay. I will get some of my money on the expenditure side of the budget as well, and I will use that to pay some of my taxes, as an example. So you can address that specific issue of unemployment or not having access to money to pay taxes, for example. You can actually address that on the expenditure side of the budget.
All right. Now, explain sound money, because this is what we're talking about here. Bitcoin and gold have been positioned as a form of sound money, quite different from the type of money we've got, fiat money. Can you explain the difference, and do you agree that it fits within that definition of sound money?
Yeah, just another comment about if we start measuring the budget tomorrow morning in Bitcoin, for example, this is going to be quite a volatile budget, I can tell you, because Bitcoin is all over the place. It goes up and down. It's very, very volatile. So it's going to be extremely difficult, just by the way. So we probably will have to wait for a cryptocurrency that's more stable. And gold is also not that stable, but it seems to be more stable than, say, for example, Bitcoin. So gold perhaps, or some sort of derivative from gold, could perhaps be a better solution in the short term than using Bitcoin as an example. But okay, what is sound money? And sound money simply means it is money that keeps its value. The South African currency, the rand, has been losing in fact, since I've done a quick calculation. For the past 40 years, the South African currency, the rand, has lost more than 99% of its value. 99% of its value. Now, that's not sound money. Currently, we have got an inflation rate in South Africa close to 6%. So the rand loses roughly about 6% of its value every year. And that compounds over time. And that's why the rand has lost so much against for example, the US dollar or some other currencies that are more sound than a South African currency. But essentially, sound money means a low inflation, a money that keeps its value.
Okay, if you look at house prices over the last decade or so, Bitcoin has been massively deflationary. A house worth R1 million a decade ago would have cost about 1,500 Bitcoin. I did the sums on these. Today, you'd be paying less than 1 Bitcoin for that same house. That's over a period of a decade. And the same goes for pretty much anything you want to buy. In other words, holding rands forces you to seek out investments that are likely to beat inflation. Holding Bitcoin, yeah, it's risky, it's volatile, as you said, but it seems to be the way to build real wealth, does it not?
Yeah, certainly. If Bitcoin maintains its value over time, it could be volatile, but if we are convinced and sure that it will more or less maintain its value or maybe even go up in value, then that is the way to go. And that's why many people like gold, because gold over for thousands of years we've been using gold, and gold maintained its value quite well over many thousands of years. The problem that I have with gold, it doesn't give you a return. It gives you the capital. So the capital could be, or the underlying value could be protected, but you don't get a return on gold. Gold doesn't pay interest. But you made another very interesting point referring to houses as an example, to property. So if a property goes up in value over time because of the effect of inflation, and you sell that property, then you have to pay capital gains tax. And that's another horrible thing about having an inflation in your economy. And that's another horrible thing for having capital gains tax, because capital gains tax is nothing but a tax on inflation. So your property goes up in value because of the effect of inflation. And if you sell your property now, then the taxman is going to take a huge chunk out of that. And essentially, we, the normal people in the country that pay capital gains tax, is being taxed on inflation. That's a tax on inflation. It's immoral. And that's the reason why I'm so very much against capital gains tax. Capital gains tax, when it's a real and an actual return that you get, a real return after you've taken the effect of inflation out, that's all good and well. But if you get taxed on inflation, that's just unfair. And that's why I'm very much against capital gains tax, by the way.
What's your advice for people who's starting out on their wealth journey? They want to build a pension fund, they want to save up for overseas holidays. There's so many options out there. Should Bitcoin form a part of that wealth creation, even at these very high prices? Because that's a question we get asked here a lot. It's gone too high. I've missed the boat. I'm not going to get involved.
Yeah. Okay, well, first answer to that is that if you want to plan for your finances going forward, get a good financial advisors. These guys today are very good. The qualified guys are really good financial. Get a good financial advisor to assist you with this journey. Okay, but a couple of things that you should do. First of all, make use of the tax benefits that you can get if you save. So there are some tax benefits if you save money for retirement. Make use of that. But that is usually not enough. You also have to start saving after tax money. And preferably, you should have it in a nicely diversified portfolio, and you should have a significant chunk of that invested abroad. I like investing abroad because the South African economy is hardly growing. There are very little investment opportunities in South Africa, and I like to take my clients' money out of the country. But be careful. Make sure that you have the right and the correct structures in place, because there are all sort of issues and obstacles if the structures are not correct. But should it include Bitcoin? And I think, yes, it should include Bitcoin, but be careful. Bitcoin is still relatively new. Bitcoin is slowly becoming more mainstream. And maybe we can talk about that. That I think is important. It is becoming a little bit more mainstream. So it seems to be becoming, fulfilling the role as digital gold in a way. So you can include part of your portfolio in Bitcoin. And I think you should include part of your portfolio in Bitcoin, but a small part of your portfolio. Don't go and put your pension fund, the whole thing into Bitcoin. That is far, far, far too risky. The same, you shouldn't put all of your pension fund in gold only, for example. It must be diversified, and only a small part of your investment can be and should be invested in something like, for example, in high risk, whether it's Bitcoin or whether it's some of these other available cryptocurrencies. Take a chance. Part of your investment should be in high risk stuff, but be very careful. Don't get sucked into putting the whole pension fund into only one asset. Even if everybody tells you that this asset's going to double and going to increase 10 times or whatever, always be conservative and careful, but take some chance into that.
Right. You talked about Bitcoin going mainstream. I presume you're referring there to the exchange-traded funds, which were authorized in January by the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's part of it. But there's another reason why I'm saying that. And that is, typically what you would find, remember these things like gold and the oil price and the rand, all those sort of things are measured in US dollar terms. So we will see the rand exchange rate at the moment is 18 rand 86 or whatever to the US dollar, for example. The gold price is currently 82, or rather, where is it? More than over $1,000 an ounce of gold now. And the oil price is 82. Everything is in terms of US dollars. dollars. Now, the value of US dollars, or the dollar itself, is determined by many things. Amongst others, the interest rate set by the Federal Reserve in the United States. So typically what would happen, if the Fed in the US decides to cut interest rates as an example, then the US dollar will fall in value and the gold price typically would go up. And that is, by the way, why the gold price has been going up recently, because the market is expecting interest rates cuts from the Fed. So exactly the same is happening to Bitcoin recently. So what I've noticed is when there's changes in relative prices in the financial markets, including the relative price of Bitcoin, because of expectations changing regarding the outlook for interest rates, then Bitcoin reacts like a more traditional financial assets. And it's only happened relatively recently. So that's why I'm saying Bitcoin is becoming more mainstream, because it's acting like anything else, like everything else, like the gold price, oil price, or whatever the case may be. And that is, and of course, the other reasons what you've mentioned as well. So Bitcoin seems to be becoming more mainstream.
I want to go back to this problem that we just started off discussing about budgeting. How do we start to fix the fiscal problems we have in South Africa? If you look at debt as a percentage of GDP, that's likely to get to 80% in the next few years. There's more than 23 million people on social welfare in South Africa, and economic growth is flat to absolutely miserable. If you were finance minister, where would you start?
Yeah, actually, the answer to that is quite easy. The problem is really politics here. But we have a problem in the form of the ANC. And the ANC is that, like any other government, any other political party, it starts with whatever they believe in. We call that ideology. What is it that they believe in? And in the case of the ANC, I guess we can call them ideology. If you talk about ideology, you can call them left-leaning, you can call them socialist, you can call them developmental. Some of them you can call communist as well, or whatever. But I think the actual problem with the ANC is not that they have the wrong ideology, because these leftish kind of ideologies are wrong. But not only that, I think if you ask most ANC members, they actually do not have an ideology. They don't actually believe in anything except that they want to line their own pockets. So the ideology of the ANC is supposed to be leftish, which is wrong. But not only that, not only are they kind of leftish, the real ideology is that this entitlement, that's what they have. So that's wrong to start off with. And secondly, if you have the wrong ideology, which the ANC has, then you start off with the wrong policies. And the policies are wrong. They've got this developmental policies. They've got policies where the state should be in charge of everything, that the state should run everything. Those policies are wrong. And thirdly, we've got an ANC government that is hugely incompetent. So they believe in the wrong things, they've got the wrong policies, and they can't do that even. In fact, they mess a lot of things up. So that is the problem. So we need to start with the right ideology, and then the right policies, and then a competent government. So the real problem with the fiscus today is not actually financial, it is politics. And if we can't fix politics, I'm afraid the financial part of the fiscus is also not going to be fixed. But the answer to that, the simple answer to that is the state must spend less money, and they must spend less money much, much better. So that is a simple answer to fixing the fiscal accounts.
Okay, final question. Do you see a future for US dollar-backed stable coins at all?
Yes, I think so. Not only US dollar-backed stable coins, but other things as well. You can get stable coins backed by gold, for example. I think there could be space for them. I foresee over time is that we're going to see more and more central bank digital currencies. I also think, including in South Africa, by the way, and I also think that in future, not that long off, many of these smaller currencies in the world are going to disappear. And this is not so far-fetched. In fact, not too long ago, 20 years ago, a lot of currencies disappeared in Europe, and it was replaced by one currency called the euro. So I think a currency like the rand, for example, and the kwachas and all these smaller currencies are going to disappear, and the bigger central bank digital currencies will start to dominate more and more. And in fact, that is exactly what is happening. Look what is happening, for example, in West Africa with West African franc. That's nothing but the euro, as an example. So that's one thing that I think is going to happen. Secondly, what I think is going to happen, we will get more and more private sector digital currencies as well, and that will include currencies like, for example, Bitcoin, and perhaps a number of some asset-backed stable coins as well. And I know of many of these ventures that where they're trying to establish some sort of asset-backed stable currency as well. And I also believe, and this is important as well, is that we will see some derivatives of these. And what I mean by that, it is quite expensive to pay with Bitcoin. You can't buy bread with Bitcoin. But if you can get a currency that is derived from Bitcoin and the transaction cost is reduced, then you can actually use a derivative of Bitcoin to, in fact, to go buy bread, as an example. So I think there's a lot of technological changes that's going to take place as far as money is concerned. And without a doubt, private sector money is going to play a much more important role than what it's currently playing.
Do you see the rand surviving?
No, I don't think so. I think the rand will disappear. And like I've said, many other smaller currencies will disappear in the process as well. Just imagine if there's a digital dollar, a central bank digital dollar, as an example, then nobody can stop me from buying it. Foreign exchange regulations become irrelevant. And I can just buy Bitcoin or rather a stable, I can buy dollars, central bank digital dollars as an example, and nobody will be able to stop me because money will become, in fact, money is information already. And there's no way that you can stop the flow of information. And that means that people will simply migrate to those currencies and those monies that they trust more. And at the moment, people just do not trust the South African currency, the rand.
We're going to leave it there. That was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist at the Efficient Group.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, hosted by Kieran Ryan. To listen to our other podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates.